Okay. Well, welcome and thank you so much for attending the session on bridging or navigating the two valleys of death and how we get things from bench to bedside. Really, this is the reality of bench to bedside. So here we go. So first of all, since the Genetics Policy Institute was put together with the notion that there really at the time was not a reasonable patient and patient advocacy in that vein, making it personal. So from the perspective of a patient with a disease and the patient's advocates, the payoff from investments in basic biomedical research come in the form of the clinically useful medical breakthroughs that the basic research enables. So the payoff really for the patients are these clinical tools. Those are the way that these breakthroughs make it from the bench to the bedside. That's the way these advancements in our understanding of the scientific basis of human disease actually find their way to patients. And it's in the form of a drug, a cell-based therapeutic, or whatever. Now, at the outset here, I'm not here to suggest, it would be kind of silly for me to suggest that every scientific advance must have its application in industry. But as the research goes along, clearly this applies. So every scientific advance, everything with industrial applicability stands on the shoulders of those who come before. So where do these biomedical, these scientific advances come from? Well, from three areas, really. U.S. biomedical research, first is federal. This is mostly for basic biomedical research. And increasingly, there are some funds that are available for biomedical development, but it's primarily basic research in nature. Secondly, the drug industry, pretty large in terms of total dollars, but the thing, it says research and development, but it's really development. In the form of most of these dollars actually go to clinical trials, which again is development. There is some discovery that goes on, but it's mostly in the form of development. And thirdly, foundations. Small dollars, there is some discovery and increasingly more, and I think one of the follow-on speakers may address that a bit. Hopefully it's increasing, but it's primarily for accelerating treatments and cures, again, which is development. So oddly, relatively few are carried to the next logical step. And why do I say this? Having spent some time in technology transfer, it's always kind of been odd to me that the discovery of a novel, and I emphasize novel drug or biologic or whatever, to intervene in the pathway, the novel pathway that the researcher has discovered, it's really not that, it's not as common as you might imagine. The thing that is actually developed, and the interesting thing is that's the part of biomedical research that patients actually experience. So if you think about it, there's basic research, and the interface between the basic research and the patient comes in the form of the tool that the physician can prescribe, or at least maybe the procedure that she or he can do on behalf of the patient. And so there's little actual federal funding available for discovery of that which the patient actually feels. And so hopefully there will be more funds available either through feds or maybe City of San Antonio or local, small, tiny little funds available for actually creating this novel thing. So hopefully we won't find ourselves in the situation that I was, and that had a direct effect on my career, with my mother at MD Anderson Cancer Center in the exam room with the world's expert in gastrointestinal cancers, the world's expert. He turned to my mother and said, "Go home. I have nothing for you. I can't help you." The world's expert in gastrointestinal cancers has no tools. That's a problem. All right, so again, the idea is if that's the interface, maybe we can increase the number of them. So bench to bedside, it's a romantic notion. It doesn't work that way. The way it actually works is things go from the bench actually outside to a company where it's transformed into the form of which that a physician can prescribe a tool, where it's transformed into the form of a tool that a physician can prescribe on behalf of a patient, and then and only then does it come back to the bedside. And so there is this notion of the second reality of the two valleys of death is these two valleys of death exist. And there has been this notion of the two valleys of death for quite some time, but mostly it's been in the form of a negative cash flows over time that some of these products or companies never make it out of, and Dr. Goldsmith mentioned this morning. So in this context, it still applies. It's absolutely financial in nature, but these companies are not stupid. They know that there is such a thing as a valley of death. So in this context, it more represents an impediment. That's something that lack of data to progress to the next step. It's an impediment to progression. And so so that's what I mean here. It's again, it is an impediment to further movement or development of a product because it won't even enter into a valley if there's no reason to believe that a company could realize their investment. So let's take a walk through the shadow of the valley of death, shall we? So the first, moving down the pathway, is discovery of the novel modulator, if that happens. Oftentimes it does not, but again, this is translation of the research into the form of a tool that a physician can prescribe on behalf of a patient. If it gets through there, then the next thing it comes to is the first valley, but once again, the next step is the company, and where it's prescribed into the form, where it's transformed in the form of the tool, and it's not trivial, it's quite expensive. So before it even gets to the company, it's got to be out-licensed. And so how do these companies make the decision as to what they're going to in-license? Well, often the form of this first valley of death is lack of good quality data that proves that there is a reason to believe, this is proof of concept data that's robust enough and significant enough for them to in-license the thing to begin with. And then the second valley of death, that is kind of more the traditional valley of death, and that the source of that impediment is lack of quality phase 1, phase 2 human clinical trial data that they could then use to convince a venture capital firm or a pharmaceutical company that they should then either buy the company or in-license the technology from the initial developing or initial in-licensing company to move it on to the next step into where it is realized, into where the basic scientific advances are realized, the potential in the form of administration to a patient. So I'm talking about these valleys of death. So, but what is the cause? All right. Well, the cause of the valleys of death it is investment risk. So what do I mean by investment risk? This is ambiguity and investors' uncertainty about the probability of success or their expected return. Just as any investment risk. I mean, it's not rocket science. Well, there's two sources of investment risk. First is scientific and technical risks inherent to the product and the market sold. And the thing to keep in mind is once the product exists, it is essentially unchangeable. If you've discovered a novel compound, the target product profile is pretty much there. All right, so it's essentially unchangeable. What's kind of the cool thing in innovation nowadays is pivoting. All right, everybody wants to pivot. Well, anything that involves clinical data, use in humans, or anything in the FDA process, it's really kind of hard to pivot a product, based on market response. So second source of investment risk is execution risk. Now, that's defined as product risk attributable to the quality of the development-related decisions made by the inventor and the company's management team that in-licensed this is the thing. Now, these are specifically the decisions made pursuant to getting it through regulatory authorities and payer reimbursement. I don't have time to really talk about reimbursement too much, but it's always kind of shocked me how little provision is made for payer reimbursement, because a lot of this stuff doesn't amount to a hill of beans if you can't get the cotton picking thing reimbursed. All right, so keep that in mind. In order to navigate the valleys of death a little more smoothly, address and deal with this investment risk. Well, if the cause of the valleys of death are investment risk, well, then the solution is meaningful, robust proof of concept data that proves the thing has been de-risked. And you'll probably hear that word again, de-risked, showing evidence that the product has benefited from solid decision making all along the process. All right. Again, the first valley of death is the lack of data to give this company, maybe a startup company, a reason to believe that they will ever see a return on their investment. So you've got to go in with some decent data, and preferably IND, investigational new drug, useful data right up front. So by doing so, you increase the investor's confidence that it'll succeed and they'll actually get a return on their investment. So segueing into rationale for blood and tissue banks, particularly advanced blood and tissue banks' involvement in cell-based therapies. So why are we here? You know, clearly this is the World Stem Cell Summit. Well, blood banks we can help attenuate or alleviate this perceived execution risk because, for healthcare university researchers and biotech companies, because first of all, we can engage in some of these activities that are out of scope for universities. God bless them, they really try to commercialize, but they're just not set up for that. And then not financially attractive for most for-profit companies. So not-for-profits actually occupy a pretty decent space where we can do things to help, as we say at BioBridge Global, to enable regenerative medicine. And that's our goal, particularly with our GenCure division, is to enable regenerative medicine, to provide those things, those data that would help them get through these two valleys of death. And specifically, so Valley 1, what can we do? We can provide high-quality biomaterials so that these researchers, when they're generating their data, there's less variability. You know, if they're starting out, it's garbage in, garbage out. If you know what you're starting with, there's a better chance that you can believe there's less variability in the data. So, you know, we have been, in the cell-based therapy world for decades. All right, people don't think of it that way, but when you're giving blood, what are you giving? You're giving cells. What is that called? It's called a cellular therapy. All right, so bone marrow transplants, umbilical cord blood, those are cells, for goodness sakes. So, and then the second valley of death, more advanced stuff. This is kind of where we would like to go, and what I propose as the vision. Actually, let me go back one. The vision for helping these companies through the second valley of death, and by providing, for example, expansion, manufacturing of cells in our facilities, in CGMP quality facilities. And then perhaps cell-based therapy relevant assays as they become more standardized and online. Right now there is no standards, but we expect that to be changing pretty soon. So I'm not going to go through the full list here, but the first valley, most blood and tissue banks can handle that. For example, especially if they have a cord blood center, they can handle these primary cells, these bone marrow, umbilical cord blood, mesenchymal stromal cells, these primary cells. And then secondly, again, a little more, I guess, provocative, is advanced blood and tissue centers like ours eventually will be able to offer these enabling technologies. And actually, we're doing some of that right now. So the vision for blood banks and cellular therapy is, for example, autologous cell-based therapy products. This one patient, one product, we've been doing that for decades, all right? So that seems to be a real problem. So blood banks, I propose, can make an autologous model technically, financially, and logistically feasible, partially because we are proximal to the providers and patients that's scaring the heck out of these large pharmaceutical companies, So again, we're there. So in summary, physician-prescribed tools are the vehicle for translation from going from basic science to the patient. It is the tool that a physician can use. And it is the most direct form by which federally funded biomedical research actually finds its way to the patient. So commercialization matters. It's not trivial. It's the only way that people like our loved ones actually will benefit from this stuff. That's the tool. And then I'm proposing small federal, whatever funds. It's remarkable. My colleagues from Tech Transfer, we make pennies scream, absolutely scream for discovery-oriented activities. It's remarkable. Just a little tiny aside. We had, what was the ignition fund? Was that $2 or $4 million? $2 million for all 16 University of Texas institutions, and it went quite a far way. $2 million. That's a rounding error. So we can make those pennies scream. Two valleys of death in the commercialization pathway are impediments. They are uncertainty, which is alleviated by quality data, and we can help with that. We can help de-risk these by providing these quality human biomaterials and these advanced services. And the vision, finally, for blood banks and cellular therapy, again, a little provocative, adherent and suspension cell expansion, quality testing, packaging, and logistics, especially for the really cool stuff, CD34 positive cells, CAR T cells, bone marrow mesenchymal stromal cells, IPS cells. So again, kind of provocative, but there we go. All right, so that's enough for me. Now I'd like to invite Marie Csete from the Huntington Medical Research Institutes in Pasadena, California, to come up and give her presentation. Thank you very much.
I didn't make that noise myself. So I think when Sean put this program together, he expected me to be more scientific in the valleys of death, and I may be doing something that he didn't expect me to do, because in my last year as the chief scientist and now acting president of our 62-year-old nonprofit research institute, I've come up with a lot of challenges that I think are important messages for anybody in the process of translation. And I'm going to emphasize a valley of death that nobody talks about, that's death at birth. And we can talk about most of those examples later on. So let me go back to this. I recently put in a grant where we were asked to check whether we were an academic or an industry institution, and we are neither. And I think we get lost in the radar of all of this, and the value of nonprofits in translation development is really, truly underestimated. So a little bit about HMRI to tell you about the context of what I'm going to tell you is right now we're spread in 4 more than 60-year-old buildings around Pasadena. And with a staff of less than 60, we do cutting-edge research in areas as diverse as magnetic resonance spectroscopy, which is chemical imaging of the brain, neural engineering, in which electrodes are placed in the brains and spinal cord or anywhere else our engineers think they are useful, our neuroscience program, tissue engineering and stem cell. We have an active liver center. We have big-time GI and GU research and a cancer mutation lab that's CLIA certified. So I'll just have you think about that for a minute. We're selling ourselves as a medical research institute. What's missing? And I've been taking the perspective that your valley of death happens not only because of your science, but products will fail when the institute fails. And Sean queued this up a little bit by saying executive risk is management dependent. And that's maybe a theme of what I'm going to tell you. So as I'm kicking off a capital campaign to put us in all one building rather than spread out around Pasadena, I'm looking around Los Angeles at two really wonderful nonprofit research institutes that failed this year. The first on the right was this beautiful House Ear Institute. Many of you probably know was probably the best hearing research program in the country. They built a new building using the architects we're building. They overspent, they died. Below is the Good Sam Hospital, where the Cardiovascular Research Institute was just lobbed off as the hospital lost money. And this is the research institute that was half of USC's cardiology research productivity. We benefited by that. And when I asked you what was missing, we hired their cardiovascular research team. So rounding out our program so that our scientists have the neighbors they need to talk to, every organ has a vascular supply. You have to have cardiovascular research if you are a medical research institute. And I reorganized these programs in a scientific strategy that has an important issue. I think it's important if you're developing a product that you have a theme. For us, the theme is the common features of all the diseases we studied: inflammation and metabolism. And our imaging is focused at imaging, metabolism, and inflammation. Find a niche. Our niche is that we can do clinical studies and clinical trials on our own, independent of a hospital, and we can do them more cheaply because that's what we do. We take care of patients and we study human patients. And our identity, therefore, is really important. All of the directors of these programs are now, by design, physician-led, and we're calling this a bedside to bench research enterprise. That way, the physicians who are the researchers in the labs can be easily identified by clinicians who have problems that they want to address and translate, as well as our neighbors at Caltech who have discovery level programs going but have no idea which physicians to talk to. So here's an example of the very, very earliest valley of death that I inherited when I came in January. Our neural engineering program was the source of the vagal nerve stimulator. It did a lot of the electronics for cochlear nerve implants. They're really, really good at translating products to the bedside. And I was told about a device, all the patents are done, that would help treat sleep apnea patients without the CPAP mask, which is quite burdensome, and you see that on the left, with an electrode device that's embedded in a very simple bite block. And the principle is that the electrode has a sensor. When the tongue falls back, it's sensed. This is all wireless. The signal will be sent to the tongue, to the nerve that moves the tongue forward. And if the tongue doesn't move, a stronger signal is sent, etc. Very interesting. I thought, oh, this is great. This is going to be really fun to translate. Well, when I looked through the pre-IDE notes with the FDA that had already happened before I got there, guess what? The clinical trial which was planned, which was a placebo, no electricity versus product clinical trial, was not preceded by proof of concept studies. Our neural engineers had never talked to a physician. So I didn't know by looking through this, and this was not picked up by the FDA. I did not know whether this device would work in the deeper stages of sleep. We needed a pivotal trial rather than the trial that was proposed. No one had talked to someone who understands about the airway. I'm an anesthesiologist. The phenotype of these patients has to be very well characterized. So this was something that was clearly going to die, and a lot of effort has gone into it. So the lesson I'm going to tell you is no matter where you are If you have a promising technology, if it's in Drosophila, talk to the physicians first. And make sure that you pull somebody in that has a lifelong dialogue with the development of this product who's a real expert in the field. So one of the other issues for small places like ours is securing IP. Because it's very costly, we have no in-house legal, and this is where a board can really help in the development of a product. So boards can be chosen both for their deep pockets and their expertise, and luckily I think we've been able to attract board members with IP expertise who can understand the science. And we need help with looking at the commercial landscape as a small institution. And this has to be done, again, upfront. I think that the small nonprofits have lessons for everybody, but we have particular problems because governance can be easily co-opted. All of our board members are volunteers, remember. And so there has to be an education to the board upfront that the world of translation is incredibly complicated. And bad publicity for small nonprofits, I think, is particularly difficult to survive. The funding mechanisms don't favor us as well. Increasingly, NIH, and I think the federal funding for science is a national tragedy. But increasingly, the percentage of NIH dollars that are going to large consortium group projects is increasing, and we just don't fit that. So we have to find the right partners in order to scale up to the kinds of mechanisms that are coming out of the NIH right now. And unlike blood centers, if we're a pure research organization, we don't have an underlying business. We can't sell blood products. Nonetheless, there's real virtue in being small. You are looking at the bureaucracy of HMRI. And I think with maximum transparency, we have the ability to do true cross-disciplinary research in a way that no medical school can do, just because the stem cell biologists are next door to the neural engineering people, are next door to the molecular neurologists, are next door to the people who do the spinal taps for our Alzheimer's study, et cetera. But all of the above really requires that the leadership is focused on translation and managing these relationships from above. So the small and larger nonprofits are great translational partners and resources, but we're completely under the radar. One of the things that I think about whenever I come to meetings is how our parent organizations should be helping us. Now, in the blood world, there's a huge alphabet soup of organizations that have helped to varying extents with the translation of regenerative therapies. And I should tell you that I have a little bias towards FACT because I've worked for many years on their regenerative medicine task force to develop patient safety standards. The first of those standards for cell therapies are out and I think are really worth a look by people in this space. So remember that your engineers, even your doctors, are not going to be trained in standards of manufacturing and standards of cell delivery, and this is at least a good first start. In the nonprofit research world, we have this association of independent research institutes. They really haven't helped us in translation to date, and I hope that that will change with increasing activity from cell therapy groups. But again, this is an organization where the member states are just terribly different from each other. I mean, we're this tiny little thing compared to the Salk Research Institute or to City of Hope, which is a nonprofit research institute right down the road. So, in addition to the scientific realities in those valleys of death, it's the politics, it's the organization that really makes a difference in terms of translation. Increasingly, products are combinations. So in this device that we were developing for sleep apnea, we have a device regulatory process, but we have a software regulatory process. And I think increasingly with cell therapies, you're going to have a cell therapy regulatory process and an adjunct therapy that goes along with it, the device delivery and all of that. So you have to have the expertise and the physician expertise in both those areas right up front. Increasingly, the targets of therapy at the molecular level are more than one, and this means that you have to have the right clinical partners again. We don't have the full pipeline of expertise, so we have to choose our partners and our collaborators very carefully. And I've listed for you the failure modes, and it's really kind of depressing to know that all of these failure modes over the last 60 years at HMRI have taken place, but they've certainly taken place at many other translational organizations. Our unique challenges are that we lack visibility and identity. I hope that changes. I hope that the sponsorship by a blood center here at this meeting changes the visibility of blood centers in this space. There's often a lack of focus on common translational themes. Requiring all hands on deck is not something that people can carry out. Scaling is tough for a small institution. We have UCSB wanting to put all of their engineering developments into our small organization. One of their 5 engineering programs has more people than we do. But again, I will just emphasize to you that the most important valley of death happens at birth, and that the failure mode that's common is that there's inadequate consultation with clinicians who can give critical insights throughout the pipeline, but especially up front. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Marie. Next up is Steve Schmid, Dr. Steve Schmid, Chief Operations Officer at Vivo Biosciences. Here we go. You want the laser, the light sword? Lightsaber.
Okay. Thank you very much. I would like to preface my talk by discussing background so that you can understand why I'm viewing this presentation from this perspective. I've been on discovery programs at Southern Research Institute, which led to the discovery of clofarabine. I was also on the development team for clofarabine, which was successfully developed and approved at Ilex Oncology. I also have worked on 2 licensing boards, both at small, mid-cap biotech and also at large biotech, and I'm going to give you a distillation down of what you would like to see in a package to get it to the point where it can get into development or attract investment to build a team to develop the compound. So proof of concept is a little more daunting than your basic research and publication mode. And what I'd like to say is you have a new discovery breakthrough, and congratulations. You've reached a point in your basic research where you think you have something that is very exciting, and now you have to go through the process of changing your world completely as you get this ready for development. The first thing, obviously, what everyone does is they repeat the experiment to make sure that it's hardened to a degree. But what they need to do as they start repeating experiments to validate this finding that is so novel is they have to do a document the world type of approach of all of the reagents and conditions in such a way that it can be replicated in someone else's hands readily. Failure to do a GLP-like approach to this type of work can lead to trouble down the road when you do an in-licensing process and they want to do a due diligence on you. So basically, you start documenting everything, even lot numbers and expiration dates on reagents. Additionally, you should want to do additional control groups to control for every aspect of your assay to make sure that this new discovery can be validated with control groups that show the negative effects or the positive effects with any control agents you have. And if you are powering your assay, you must sit down with a biostatistician and look over what is the best way to set up this design so it is powered correctly, so when you say that you have statistical analysis, they're validated by a biostatistician. We scientists play with biostatistics, and as we know, there are 3 forms of lies in this world, and statistics is one of them. Okay, you've got this to the point where you really like it. It's really showing up well, experiment after experiment. It's really exciting. You then have to take a look at, what do I do now? Time to go talk with your tech office or your attorney down the hall at the pharma company. But what you need to do is talk about, is this really a viable product, and should we file a disclosure? Filing a disclosure gives you a little bit of protection in the very beginning, but you need to do this before you start thinking about doing any hint of leaning toward publication. Publication discloses it to the public and can weaken any patent protection you might try and get down the road. So we're talking about getting this ready for out-licensing to another entity that will do the full development of this. You have this exciting compound, you have limited funds, but you should try and do as much of this as possible within the scope of what your experience is or your colleagues can provide. You want to go through de-risking this new product potential. As experimentation continues, you maintain these comprehensive records. You plan experiments to be conducted by other technically skilled people, either in your lab or down the hall, somebody who can replicate your work without you touching it. This gives some robustness feel to it, and it also helps because when you reach the point of out-licensing, you have to be prepared to accept an invitation to do a material transfer agreement so that the company in licensing potential can assess it in their own shop and see that it really is hardened data that they can trust. As you go ahead with your experimentation, you should also look at all these various parameters of pH or reagents or concentrations, anything that can be varied within the experimental design to find ranges where the discovery will work. One of the things is it'll give you a feel for optimization of how you're going to prepare this and get it over to the company to start working on it, but also as you sit down with your patent attorney. It can play a role in claims where you can set up ranges within the claims of how the invention can be used, but not divulge the exact point of those parameters. So it makes it a little harder to reverse engineer. In the case of intellectual property, it is helpful to do a search on your own and talk to your attorney about doing a search to take a look and see where is the freedom to operate. Now that usually takes a very professional look, and if the university doesn't have the funds, you may be able to find a way to do that with counsel outside, but finding the freedom to operate is very helpful in determining the value of moving forward. If you don't have freedom to operate, you really don't have value in the product to take forward unless there are special conditions. Planning out the patent strategy. Seek counsel for how you're going to lay out the claims. Make sure that the data that you generate validates the claims and can be recorded in such a way that at any time in the future, this data can be produced in a reliable fashion to show the claims exist and they are valid. I've been an expert witness on patent attorney litigation, and I can tell you inequity of presentation to a patent attorney can result in negation of the patent, and if it is a use patent, it also causes negation of the genus patent or the composition of matter. So it's a death knell for doing that. So you have to lay out your claims carefully and have them well underpinned with evidence that is well verifiable. I will echo the emphasis on getting clinical guidance for your item that is to be developed early as possible. It will help you tell a good story in the in-licensing process, and it will also give you guidance as to looking to markets and utility and cost of goods and valuation. But getting that clinical expertise on board early is critical. You should also prepare to take a look at the FDA and EMEA regulations regarding your space and where this might fit. This will require regulatory guidance from inside your institution or where you emanate from with your discovery. Always make sure that you vet the regulatory people who are helping you, that they have expertise in these areas. Regulatory expertise is deep and wide, but not everybody is deep and wide at the same time. So make sure that you get very good guidance there. Market research, preliminary cursory market research can be done in a setting at your own institution. You should also pressure test the application of the discovery by taking a look at the potential for cost of goods, distribution of goods, the route and schedule of administration with clinical guidance. What's the potential for clinical adoption? What's the standard of care that you're going to be comparing against? All these things roll into a package that's going to be presented to a company, and they have to determine what the value of this is. And with licensing and success based on realistic expectations, you seek out the independent expertise in every single field that is involved with the licensing process, and make sure that they're on board with finding the information you need. You're the researcher, you've got this great discovery, you're the founder or the originator of the patent, but you have expertise in just a small part of the science, not the development, not the legal, not the regulatory. Surround yourself with the best expertise possible. Beware of founder syndrome. If you're working on your own and you have control over the licensing process and you're the originator of the patent, there is a process known as founder syndrome where the inventor is so close to his idea that he has unrealistic expectations as to the valuation or the utility of the agent, and can cause great problems in the in-licensing process. It can lead to actually breaking of the agreement. So this is something you should be aware of, and surround yourself with advice that can help guide you in the realistic fashion. Always be open to learn from people of the development areas involved in the process. You will learn new things as you go along on your path. A great team with a good discovery opportunity will trump a weak team with a great discovery opportunity every time. There are lots of drugs that are being developed and lots of products being developed that marginally improve patient conditions. That they've been done by great teams. There are great discoveries that have fallen on their face because the team has not been up to the challenge. So remember who you work with and make sure that you have the very best you can. The investment decisions hinge on technical and execution of excellence and required to gain approval for market process. So who you license this to also has to be vetted the other way. You do not want to take it to a group that does not know how they're going to do it, but they have the money to do it. That will guarantee your system might go somewhere that you don't want. In a cautionary tale, there have been major examinations of failures of drugs and products in the biomedical space, specifically 53 anti-cancer drugs and compounds and biologicals that failed. 47 of them were detailed in their review and seen to have failed all the way back in the discovery preclinical area. When they reviewed all the data of all of these agents that failed, it was somebody presented something that was the best of 6 experiments, or somebody who presented shabby data, didn't know their starting materials. So these things have to be taken into effect. So de-risking is a long and complex process. You have the wherewithal to work with expertise around you, utilize it. Be accepting of good people with good ideas. And you will get this to the point where you can attract investment once you have a quality data package, which is paramount in the very beginning of this process to avoid that first valley of death. And in the end, if you make it through the second valley, this is what you get to see. And with this, I will end with one of my favorite idols in oncology, Dan von Hoff. His favorite saying was, "The patient is waiting." So we should try to do a good job all the way through the process so that we can have the effect on the patient. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve.
Sure.
All right. Next is Randy Goldsmith, investor in residence at T3DC, the Texas Technology Development Center. Cheers.
So which one advances here? Is it the red one?
That's back. Okay, don't push anything else.
Good. All right. Don't follow instructions. Good deal. All right. okay, it's time to change mindset. We're going to move from the first valley to the second valley. We're going to move from thinking about research, technology, intellectual property, to the business aspects of moving a venture from the lab out of the university into the marketplace. It's a challenging role. I've worked in this area now for 25 years and have served over 2,000 entrepreneurs who are interested in moving their venture opportunity forward with an innovative, intensive model of new technology. And I can tell you that every single entrepreneur or potential entrepreneur that walked through my door had one question: where can I get the money? And so we are one of those rare organizations that invite that question. We welcome that question because we feel like and know that it is our mission to help create new high-performance, innovation-intensive enterprises for San Antonio. And that's our field of effort. So I am a practitioner in the Valley of Death. I live and die in the Valley of Death. I try to bring order to chaos. And so today I'm going to give you a chance to get inside my head and understand how I operate and the tools and the process that I use. So I'll go through it fairly quickly. But I can tell you that in general, I have three types of clients. One is that entrepreneur that walks through my door that has intellectual property in hand, oftentimes has some preliminary data, sometimes has part of a venture team, but certainly still in the startup phase and certainly asking for funds. The second potential client that we have are those inventors that spin out of the university with an intent to commercialize. And we too have to look at the inventor syndrome and make a determination as to whether or not we can actually work with this inventor to be successful in commercialization. So not often, but sometimes that is an immediate deal killer for us. We have limited resources, limited time, and a large client base. So we have a very tough love model. The other client opportunity is actually what I call raw technology, where the university will regularly contact us, give us a chance to look over disclosed technology that's available for licensing. And we will then look at that technology, determine whether or not it's a fit for our community, and whether or not we feel like that we can bring the team and resources to bear to bring this technology to fruition. That's the least most common, but it's one that we do have in our portfolio on a regular basis. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. So my job is to help companies navigate this valley. So when we dive into the valley, clearly the first companies that come to me are startups. At this point in time, we're dealing with a fantasy. We're dealing with a fictional document. And our role during this startup phase is to see how much documentation, how much validation, at least from a preliminary or hypothetical standpoint, can we bring to this venture to know whether or not we can in fact go forward to the next stage, which would be the seed stage. Seed stage is where we actually then start expending funds to begin to get preliminary data. Now, when you hear the word data, most of you are thinking about clinical data. We also have to have market data. We also have to have business data. So I'm in the world of working with an entrepreneur to help invent a company that is commercializing an invention. So it's really a double struggle, if you will, to work through the nuances of making that a reality. But by the time we get to the seed stage, and we've completed the seed stage, we have moved from fictional to documentation, that we feel like that everything that we have included in our business plan is actually supportable to the best that we can with respect to the questions that the investor will typically ask. Once we have finished the seed stage activity, we're now available for investment capital. And generally that's in the form of angels and strategic partners. Moving beyond the seed stage, then we get into the data phase, clinical data phase. And I can tell you that the model that I'm sharing with you, I've used for 20 years, and I have used it with IT companies, software companies, medical device companies, real estate companies, and pharma companies. But on the scale of difficulty, a software company is like a blimp on the screen for me in terms of the level of assistance that those companies required compared to a medical device or a pharma. They are magnitudes different in terms of complexity and commercial requirements. Generally in today's market, when we're in this early stage, that could consist of actually 3 or 4 rounds of funding. It's not just one round. It's moving from round to round as data propels the venture through the commercialization process. And I would say, if I were looking down here at the screen and saying what you're seeing is a typical valley of death for a software company, if you were talking about a pharma company, extend that range out by a factor of 4 or 5, and with a depth about 4 or 5 deeper. The valley is much, much wider and much deeper depending on the regulatory requirements of the venture opportunity. So, again, giving you a chance to get in my head, my objective is to be sure that I'm giving quality service to the entrepreneurs and the ventures that come through the door. So over a 20-year period, I've started out being somewhat chaotic, if you will, in terms of how we engage with entrepreneurs. So over time, it became clear that the more we can bring process and tools to the effort and streamline it in an effort to accelerate the ventures through the commercialization process, the more likely we were to be successful. And in an effort to do that, we discovered that it's a very linear process. It's a stepwise process. So I've developed a process. It's very much like climbing a stairway. We go from one assessment to the next, again, going from fantasy to documentation as we progress up that stairway. As a practitioner and a coach, I cover most of the lavender areas there. Once I get to that step, I hand it over to the investors, and the investors then take it from there, making their own determination whether or not it is in fact a feasibly fundable venture. So in my mind, when someone comes in, I have a fairly programmatic process that I'm going to engage in a coaching activity that's going to follow a fairly prescribed methodology to get to that data and to get to that validation. So I have a general expectation of how to serve each and every client. I've developed a set of tools to help accommodate those. I've converted that into an SAS that I make it available to them on the website. But coming back to Marie's point, the first thing that we do is ask the question, who cares? And will it work? So we'll take that knowledge based on the work that you've done within the university or within the institution, and ask the question of the physician, of the market people, everyone and anyone that we can get feedback from to the viability of this particular product opportunity. Once we've done that, then we'll try to characterize that particular product within the universe of all other products. Not all products are equal when it comes to a venture. Some have greater impact, some have greater value, but at the end of the day, we know that investors are typically looking for a disruptive platform technology in this field that we're working in, because those are the ones that offer the greatest return on investment. So that's what we're looking for. It doesn't mean that everyone will be, and it doesn't mean that if the product opportunity does not qualify as a disruptive platform technology, it still could have market value. So we look for, in doing that analysis, in characterizing the technology, we look for impact, we look for product value, and then ultimately decide of those product opportunities, which one fall within what appears to be a venture fundable deal. Now in this case, the one with the circle around it is a high value, low risk product opportunity. Frankly, I never see that in the medical device or therapeutic sector. They're all high risk and high value. So that's what the investors invest in. Investors buy risk. on the anticipation that as the venture moves forward, that it will de-risk and the value of their investment will increase. The second tool that I use is a venture readiness assessment. I want to know, where is this deal today along the commercialization pipeline? So I have a tool that I use to get some insight into what has been accomplished, what still needs to be done. And it's a very stage gate linear process again, step 1, step 2, step 3. The idea being, let's move through this as quickly as possible because time is money and time is risk. We never know when Katrina's going to hit in the middle of our product development opportunity. We never know when we're going to have a 9/11. We never know when the stock market's going to crash. There are a lot of external extremities out there that are beyond our control, that are time sensitive. So when I think about the commercialization model, I divide it into phases, steps, and technical and marketing and business dimensions. I can't think of one without thinking of the other. So all of that has to be processed into the logic. And each of those steps then becomes a go, no-go process. If we're not ready to move past step 1, we don't go. So we'll take them one step at a time, but again, as quickly as possible. That stepwise model also helps us identify who are the service providers on our team. This morning we had a session on the San Antonio innovation ecosystem and who are all the players in our community that are part of this effort to bring new ventures to market. This helps me identify who does what in San Antonio, so as I work with these clients, I've got a database of individuals to call to help this venture. They have self-identified themselves to this process and look forward to engaging with us. That doesn't mean that every service provider is in San Antonio. Sometimes we go to San Diego, San Francisco, Boston, or wherever we need to go to get the best service that we can for the client opportunity. The model also then identifies the capital. Where's the capital come from? When does it come? And from what source? And what level of capital could the entrepreneur expect based on the stage of development they're in? So this becomes a sharing document. When the entrepreneur comes in, we can give them an overview of here's where we're going, here's the tool and the pathway we're going to use, and it's sort of our way or the highway, because we have a sufficient client load that we tell them if you're willing to work through this process, there's a 50% chance that you'll get funded based on historical data. The optimal path would be that they'll follow those steps in order, but in reality it doesn't work that way. That when someone comes in the door, they are all over the page. So my objective is to figure out what have they done well, what needs to be repeated, and how do we get them back into some logical form of progress. So that's part of the fun part. It's also part of the chaotic part. The next tool that we use is a risk readiness tool to determine the commercial potential of the deal from an investor's perspective. This tool is to identify how would an investor look at this deal from a risk profile. We know that investors basically break down all of their questions, all of their inquiries into 5 basic blocks: the execution risk, product risk, market risk, management risk, and financial risk. Any question that you'll hear an investor ask a client, you can put into one of those categories. Now, in every deal, it has inherent risk, depending on the stage of development. Obviously, a seed stage company does not have sales yet, so that is a risk, but it's an inherent risk. There are some risks that are addressable risk, and that's part of our key goal here, is to identify what is it we can address today to mitigate that risk and de-risk this deal. So that becomes a great part of our focus. Once we've looked at the risk, then we move it into commercialization strategy, where we begin to look at the overall comprehensive venture model and start talking about what kind of team do we need to have, who do we need to have on the team, when do we need to have those folks on the team, what kind of financing we're going to require, and so forth and so on. That becomes part of the business model. Now, I will typically see 3 types of models. One is what we call the bootstrap model, where it is self-financed. They'll expend some money to advance the company, spin it up to get a little bit of revenue, reinvest that revenue up and down across that profit, that cash flow line, until eventually they get traction, critical mass, and they're off and going. That represents probably 95% of all American companies. the bootstrap model. We encourage that because it generates the highest rate of return for the entrepreneur. The next model is the entrepreneurial model, where they'll start off as a bootstrap, get some real good data, get some real good traction, and then become a candidate for investment capital. So we see that one a lot as well. And then there's what I call the planned growth model. This is the medical device or the therapeutic. You don't launch until you know that you can line up the capital. You don't put your toe in the water to see if this venture is going to work. It's got to have all the data, and again, you've got to have that documentary to be able to present to the potential investor to get that first infusion of capital. The next tool is the business plan evaluation. Again, that's just a methodology to ensure that we've taken into consideration all the risk factors and that it will generate the type of return on investment that the investor will require. The ideal deal is a high-performance enterprise with a radical disruptive platform innovation with exponential growth potential and a serial entrepreneur and reliable capital. I'm still waiting for that one. I've not yet seen that. But really, what we're trying to do here is just validate all those things so that we can move it forward. And then eventually move into valuation. Once we have that data, we can now put a value on that in order to determine how much of this deal should the investors really participate in from a partnership standpoint. A number of variables to look at that we move into that calculation. This is normally a black box for entrepreneurs and have no clue on how to arrive at valuation. Once we've done that, we're ready for the investor presentation. And when we stand an entrepreneur in front of the investors, we have spent a considerable amount of time explaining to the entrepreneur what the investor needs and what they need to understand about their deal. So once we've done that, we will have spent anywhere from 6 months, sometimes to a year, teeing this particular deal up so that they can come and visit with John Kerr. And John is our next presenter.
Well, let me start off by dismissing your expectations that Randy just generated. And that if you'd come to see me maybe 20 years ago when I was actually working in the venture capital business, I might have been able to help you out as far as providing funding. I'm not in that business today. I'm actually on the other side of the table begging for money from venture capitalists. My experience in this area started about 23 years ago when I first was involved in getting a brand new startup life sciences company off the ground back in 1992 in the oncology area. There was a researcher who had come out of the San Antonio CTRC and Johns Hopkins before that, and his co-founder who had come out of Scripps. That company ultimately went on to raise over $150 million of investor capital and unfortunately never succeeded in developing a commercial product. So the idea that if you only have enough money, you can succeed in this industry is obviously not the case. But there are a great many ventures that ultimately fail because they run out of capital, they're unable to attract capital. And that can occur at different stages of their development. We've identified 2 valleys of death. Broadly speaking here today, there are really probably a good many more of those valleys. We've talked, some of the speakers have talked quite eloquently about the risk of failure at the very outset in terms of the process of either out-licensing technology from an academic setting or launching a commercial venture from an academic setting. I also have some experience in that area because I spent a period of a couple of years serving as the president of the Texas Biomedical Research Institute here in San Antonio, which is another ARI member, NIH-funded basic biomedical research institute. And during my time there, we actually launched a spin-off for-profit venture that's been about 7 years ago now that's still going strong. So what I'm going to talk about today primarily is the risk of failure once a company has already gone through the first stages of capitalization and is at a point now where it really, and this is in the area of therapeutics. My experience with medical devices is almost non-existent. Almost all the companies that I've had a serious involvement with were developing pharmaceutical products, and primarily in the oncology area. So I sort of picked the two highest risk things you could do, pharmaceutical products and cancer. So I'm certainly well acquainted with these risks. But my focus today is going to be talking about how do these companies, once they've gotten to the point that they are kind of ready for prime time, if you will, that they've already gone through a lot of preclinical development and early clinical development, how do they get the capital they need in order to reach the ultimate success of either taking the company public or selling the business or simply becoming self-sustaining from a financial point of view? Well, a little historical perspective might be helpful. When I first got involved in working with these companies in the early 1990s, the venture capital world would invest at a pretty early stage. It was not uncommon for venture capitalists to invest long before companies had any human clinical data to support their ideas. In fact, back in that time period, it was possible even to take these companies public sometimes when they were still in a very early stage of development. But obviously that has all changed radically over the last 10 or 15 years. And these things seem to come in cycles, but broadly speaking, in the life sciences area for therapeutics, the venture capitalists today are very reluctant and very seldom invest in companies that do not have robust human clinical data to support what they're doing. So the obvious question is, how do you get to this point without venture capital funding? Or putting it another way, what can you do to improve your chances of making it to that point to get to where you can either attract funding from a venture capitalist or possibly from an industry partner that can allow you to execute your business plan. Today, I'm the founder and chairman of two San Antonio companies that are both developing therapeutics. One, Azaya Therapeutics, which is developing nanoparticle encapsulation chemotherapy products, been around since 2002. And the other is Avestra Inc., which was the spinoff company out of Texas Biomedical, which is developing, using expertise in steroid chemistry for women's healthcare products. Neither of these companies has had venture capital funding, and yet both are well into advanced human clinical development. So I'll use that experience in part to talk about how I think you can try to navigate through this valley of death. One thing I'd say is that I've seen a number of common mistakes made that by entrepreneurs and inventors that make it much more difficult to obtain the funding they need to get to the point I'm describing. One is the example that's been alluded to earlier of where the founder is the inventor and believes he can act as the CEO without any relevant business experience. And this is just a classic example of where problems are likely to arise. But it's very often the case. Another common mistake is the early rounds of investment, like Randy was talking about, were done where they set very unrealistically high valuations. And this was typically because the founder was trying to hang on to as much equity as possible and therefore price the financing unrealistically high to the investor, and perhaps had unsophisticated investors who were putting up relatively small amounts of capital. But at that point, you're faced with what's called a down round in the industry. In order to attract the capital, you have to sell the securities at a significantly lower price than the previous investors paid, which is obviously very problematical. Another common problem is, particularly with a venture that has come out of an academic research environment, the structure of the ownership there's complexity and conflicts of interest. layers of complexity and conflicts that simply can deter sophisticated investors who typically have very fine legal counsel, and they'll look at these things and go, you know, what am I getting myself into here? So simplicity in the legal structure and lack of conflicts of interest are, in the very beginning, are critically important. I often have seen situations too where what I would call the tendency to swing for the fences, to try to pick a leading candidate, particularly if we're developing pharmaceutical products, that's going to be a, you know, a game changer. It's going to be some blockbuster new drug, and also may involve a tremendous amount of competition that has to be defeated in order to achieve success. So those are sort of that's sort of the highest risk strategy you could follow. Often a related problem is failing to understand or even think very much about the problems of scale-up manufacturing. Thinking, well, if I can do this in a small scale, in a laboratory setting, and get the results we're looking for, well then, this thing could be worth a fortune, without even thinking about how realistic is it that you can scale this up to commercial scale, and what are the manufacturing problems that could lead to. So those are mistakes that I've seen made. What are things that you can do to improve your chances of success and help to further de-risk? I'll just touch on a few. One, in the area of pharmaceutical product development, is to think about NCEs, new chemical entities, versus a reformulated product. Reformulated products, I think, are much lower risk and typically involve less capital requirements to get into and through the clinic. Super generic products. This is a different strategy. This is a second brand strategy where there's a competing product that's under patent. You figure out a way to make the same product so that your regulatory approval is that of a generic, but in fact, yours is a patented technology as well, and a lot faster time through the regulatory environment, much, much lower clinical development costs. A third strategy would be alternative revenue generation. Is there a way to have, you're an innovator, you're developing a new product, but you have no revenue, you're living off your capital, you're having round after round of financing. Is there a related business, such as you were describing with the blood banks? There's a way to generate revenue from a CRO operation, CMO operation, even on a small scale. Reduce the amount of external venture funding that you need. Probably the single most important thing, however, it's been touched on earlier, is the quality of the management team, which is a different question than the quality of the technology. You can have great technology, well-protected IP, but if you don't have a good team, a seasoned team that's done it before, that understands these risks, is smart enough to figure out how to do things in a capital efficient way. It's not going to take 10 million, maybe you can get the same thing done for 5 million, that has a network of people in the industry, in the financial community, who know them, who recognize their skills. Then it's 10 times easier to raise the money you need to raise and to deploy it more efficiently and get to the result you're trying to get to. Lastly, I just say that geography makes a big difference. There are certain parts of the country where there's plentiful capital, and the people who are investing it know what they're doing, and they understand this industry. There are many other parts of the country where there's scarce capital, and very few people with experience in investing in this industry. If you happen to be in one of those places, which I would suggest most of Texas is, and most of the United States is, frankly, other than parts of the West Coast and East Coast, then you're pretty much reliant on angel investors. And learning to work with angel investors, how to attract tens of millions of dollars of capital, because that's what it takes, without venture capital investors, is obviously very difficult. It has its advantages because they tend to be less price sensitive, less cutthroat or ruthless in the way they negotiate deal terms. But the disadvantages are they don't often have a very good understanding of the industry and particularly of the risks. And so if you have something that doesn't go as planned, then angel investors can quickly become disenchanted and fearful. So those are just some practical suggestions on how to get the financing that all of these highly capital-intensive ventures need.
So we're essentially out of time. If there are one or two questions, perhaps we can take them. If not, going once, going twice. I want to thank you very, very much for your attendance. Cheers.